writing is a kind of like a trigger, learn, unlearn, and relearn. Kind of unlearning how to be a traditional entrepreneur, reinventing yourself as a more of a enabler, reinventing yourself as a writer who doesn't want to make money from writing. These are very interesting thought process, right? So, and in the process of writing this book, I had to learn a great deal because we're talking about so much new level of technology and new applications and new possibilities.
Hey folks, before we get started with the show, I wanted to offer you the chance potentially of a lifetime. If you're looking to get your brand in front of the boldest thinkers in business, this is the place to do it. The Unlearn podcast is downloaded in over 85 countries with a growing audience of over 100,000 listeners per month. That includes C-suite leaders, startup founders, and executives from Fortune 500 companies to scaling startups. We're ranked in the top 1% of business podcasts on Spotify and Apple across multiple regions. But our listeners just don't stream, they stick around, with 85% completing the entire show on their first listen. If your brand wants to align with bold ideas, breakthrough thinking, and a global audience that's not afraid to challenge the startup quo, get in touch. For the first time ever, we're offering sponsorship opportunities on the show, and we'd love to have you with us. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode, and it greatly supports our podcast. Welcome back to the Unlearn podcast, where we challenge assumptions, explore transformative ideas, and help you rethink the way you work and live. I'm Barry O'Reilly, and today I'm especially excited about this episode, where we're joined by a true trailblazer in the fields of neuroscience, philosophy, and leadership, Faisal Hoque. Now, Faisal is the author of the groundbreaking book Transcend, the New Science of Self-Actualization. In fact, he's written over 10 books over the span of his career. In this book, he redefines what it means to reach our highest potential, both as individuals and organizations, drawing on cutting-edge research, real-world examples, and practical neurohacks. Faisal shows how to ignite our purpose, cultivate presence, ignite purpose, and really understand what it means to have connections. Whether you're an executive looking to transform your company culture, an entrepreneur looking for peak performance, or just a personal growth journey, this conversation is one for you. We dive into the areas of transcendence, unpacking the science behind flow states, how you can think about the paradox of purpose and people, as well as many examples from his own personal career. So grab your headphones, settle in. This is going to be a fun show without limits. But let's find out where it got started from.
This was in my mid-20s, late 20s, when I had my second startup. And I raised a lot of money from the VCs, and I was not getting along. And they had a different idea how to scale it. So they got rid of me because they had the largest share of equity. And I got very, very disappointed, and got even more disappointed when they ran the bloody thing to ground in 18 months. And we had like killer customers, MasterCard, Amex, the best of the best customers. So I got very, jaded. And then I said, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. This is too hard. And, you got to deal with, but I obviously 10 months later, I started my next company, be at it. So that was a pivotal moment and how to not to do these type of things. And I didn't raise any money. I bootstrapped it and I wrote my first book. This is like right around, when the internet bubble was about to happen. And I argued that, look, that most of these businesses are going to go belly up, just like mine did, because of the fact that you're not really focusing on the business model. You're too focused on scaling and exiting and the actual tech model. So, and so that was a pivotal moment. Then another pivotal moment was that my next company I ran for, I don't know, 15, 16 years, and I was getting very fatigued because we grew and we were all over the world, and I was traveling like crazy. And, I had this board member who was a Japanese gentleman who took me to Japan several times, and it allowed me to connect to my Eastern philosophical route. And it just kind of triggered this notion that there got to be a higher purpose and different purpose So I was in Dubai airport and wrote a book called, wrote the outline of Everything Connects. And so that was another pivotal moment. And then last few years, I have a son who's now 22. At 18, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is that's my only son, and he's doing fine now. But that was pretty, as you can imagine. So I set up an organization, and I said I'm going to pick up my pen and I'm going to use my platform, to create a awareness while I preach about these things using my book. So the book proceed goes to the couple of research institute that supports him. Does the treatment. One is Yale, other one is Dana Farber in Boston. So these are like many mini pivotal moment as everybody has in their lives. With all the ups and downs and some revealing moments and whatever you want to call it, and it changes you.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things that really struck me when I was reading Transcend, right? One of your sort of core points was about this idea of redefining self-actualization, which really resonated with me personally, right? One of the things I'm a huge believer in is that, the world is constantly changing, and if we're not adapting to those circumstances, we're not necessarily going backwards. We're almost falling off a cliff in terms of whether it's an experience you have, like you described with your son, or a new technology that potentially changes the way businesses can be built if you're an entrepreneur. For me, that's a huge part of life. So tell us a little bit about your thinking about redefining self-actualization and why that was such an important part for you when you were talking about this book.
Yeah, because look, once the basic stuff is covered, meaning I mean, as we human being are all the same in terms of our need to survive, which comes from food and shelter, and Maslow described this very well. I mean, and it's well established that you got to cover those basics, and you have food on the table, you got roof on your head. You reach certain level in your life, then you start questioning like, "Okay, well, what's next, and why am I here?" Or hopefully you will be asking, why am I here and what impact I'm making, being a positive, influence or a negative influence, and etc. And each time, what happens is something happens to you. At least that's what happened to me. In various stages of your life, you kind of try to redefine what that means to, self actualization of your who you are and what you're doing, right? So, when we are both tech entrepreneurs, so we can relate to this. When you started out, or at least when I started out, it was all about the chase and can I build something and can I do something and can I prove myself and that sort of a thing. At this stage of my life, when I'm now in my 50s, it's all about whatever I do on a daily basis. Does that make any difference? And I'm not here to change the world. I don't have that kind of arrogance that whatever I do is going to have any significant impact with to billions of people. But even if it touches one person and you manage to do something, how that not be fulfilling? To me, that's immensely fulfilling. So I'm doing what I know best in terms of, I write, I build things, and I try to help customers, and try to push them to their higher purposes. And I'm constantly learning, I've turned my adversity with whatever positivity I can create. So as I was just sharing with you about my son, I mean, I'm not bitter about it. I accepted it as a father. It's difficult to accept that. Why does your child have a challenge like that? But he does, and he's doing well, and he's very grateful. So am I, and I live in positivity. I live in gratitude, and I turned that around, and I'm kind of using this as a motivation to give as much as I can. That has become my calling, and it fulfills me. So, and it's different for each person because each person's journey and the pivotal points or experience and the people they will meet will change them, and then you cannot create somebody else's journey. It's uniquely yours, but it all depends on perspective on how you look at it and what you do with it.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is even harder at the moment is people are sort of fed in different information sources so many stories of cheap, fast, massive success in anything that anybody does, right? I'm almost on the point of deleting all social media from my life because every time I go on there, it's someone telling me how to make $10,000 a day by just selling their online course. And now, they're hanging out in Bali drinking mojitos 4 times a day, and they're 21. Like it's all this sort of totally I definitely grew up chasing the game, wanting to prove myself, show what I could do. I think it's nature in some respects in folks, if you're driven and that excites you in entrepreneurship. But in many ways I've found that very empty as well. Also, even
Yeah,
being, having failures or successes, it feels very empty.
yeah,
But and again, it's one of these things. It sort of ties into another point that really probably was one of the favorite chapters of your book, chapter 8, which talked about purpose and people paradox. Right. So for me, you were talking about this idea where organizations sort of almost obsess about this mission statements, yet they create no genuine, if you will, connectivity among employees. And
yeah.
again, these things sort of, again, they sort of rhyme, if you will, with one another. It's your personal calling and what motivates you to drive impact in your own life. And then many people join corporations because they want to feel part of a community that represents something that they're trying to do and get towards, an impact. And yet most people are stuck in companies. They may even feel more isolated than ever. I think I was looking at Gallup's survey results saying that people are more disengaged in their work now than they've ever been in the history of surveys, which is again sort of a heartbreaking statistic. So, what are some of the things you've observed to help both people who are inside those businesses realize how they can connect to a purpose, as well as what companies should be doing to help people feel connected, not only to the business, but to one another inside it?
Yeah, look, I mean, so purpose and people. These are can be very philosophical, but they can be also very practical. So whether that's a government agency or whether that's a large organization, what I've tried to do, and even with my own various type of businesses that I have, then the various types of teams I have, I try to kind of focus on what is the individual contribution that makes up the greater purpose. So it's not enough just to define, here's our purpose. You have to kind of connect that purpose with individual who are actually contributing to that purpose. If you can't show that connection, then there is a misalignment. So you may have very lofty goal, but if you don't, you got to connect that. So in a very practical terms, let's say I help an organization create a innovation portfolio that whereby they're kind of exploring different kind of opportunities, and it's made up with many different kind of teams that will actually have to execute. So you have to kind of connect the dot, what each of those team members bring to the table, how they contribute their idea, and how that ideas actually gets implemented, and then how the organization and those individual gets rewarded on the basis of that collective creation, right? And it's not just a lip service, because if you do that lip service, then it doesn't work. And then there's this new notion of how do you create regenerative organization and need regenerative leadership that can regenerate and keep this fuel burning all the time, and kind of propagate throughout the organization. It's a job of a leader to inspire, influence, but also put together that re- infrastructure that actually pulls them in and allows meaning these individuals that we're talking about, that feels disconnected and not feeling being appreciated, and they don't know why they're there, etc., etc. It's very important to pull those things together, and it's also important to help them grow and maybe leave and do something else, right? So the best thing you can do for somebody else is live up to their potential, and that doesn't mean just holding on to them. It's allowing them to flourish in their own terms and own calling and own destination.
One of the things that we have a venture studio here called Nobody Studios, right? And the mission is to do 100 companies over 5 years. We've a portfolio of 14 companies, all individual companies, sort of in, it's quite dispersed in terms of their focus areas. But one of the incentives that we sort of designed in from the very beginning of the studio is that all the startups obviously earn equity in their own businesses, but they also earn equity in the studio as well. So they're sort of incentivized, if you will, to not only be successful within their own startup, but regardless of the outcome of their startup, they're always earning equity in the studio. So if one of the other startups succeeds, they're succeeding.
Sure.
And, we found that that has been one of the most powerful ways to see how much they want to help each other then in the portfolio. Typically in other innovation portfolios I've been involved in, people are they're competing, they're trying to,
Yeah, sure.
outdo one another. But now what we've discovered is that people are happy to help one another, right? And it does create a stronger sense of community within the studio because, everyone sort of feels like we're in this together, right? And anyone succeeding is everyone succeeding. And that's certainly, one of the things that I've found has really created a little bit of that stickiness between folks who are distributed all over the world. We're not a physical studio. We're not just in one spot. We've teams in 17 countries. So but I think it's a really important part that you're describing of inspiring influence and having incentive as well is a huge part of it.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a eco. You're describing a self-sustaining ecosystem, right? I mean, just look at nature. Everything has a meaning. Everything kind of supports each other. There's a role for a dung beetle as well as a elephant, right? So, we can't forget that. And and all the, if you look at those very sustainably focused organization, whether that's Patagonia or Hershey's or any other of those organizations, they are very community and ecosystem focused, right? Because you kind of support each other as they grow. Collective success is your success. We flourish. We're interconnected. We're all interconnected. I mean, as much as we don't want to admit that we're interconnected, we are interconnected. And if we kind of live by that philosophy, it's easier to succeed. Nobody has everything, by themselves, right? So I love that your studio or the portfolio companies helping each other, and that makes perfect sense to me.
So one of the sort of core tenets of the show is unlearning, right? And transcend, it's a great name for the book, The New Science of Self-Actualization. Tell us something you felt you unlearned, if you will, as you went through the sort of process, if you will, of writing this book. What were some of the things that maybe surprised you about yourself as you started to explore these topics? What shifted in your thinking?
I think that I have been doing that for a long time, and every couple of years, I kind of, one of my other book is called Reinvent, but I mean, I'm not, I'm using this tongue in cheek, but I kind of force myself to reinvent myself, and actually writing a book. This would be my 10th book, and I constantly write articles. Writing is a kind of like a trigger for unlearn, learn, unlearn, and relearn, and kind of unlearning how to be a traditional entrepreneur, reinventing yourself as a more of a enabler, reinventing yourself as a writer who doesn't want to make money from writing. These are very interesting thought process, right? And in the process of writing this book, I had to learn a great deal because we're talking about so much new level of technology and new applications and new possibilities, and also a lot of questions around humanity and legislation and law and whatnot. And furthermore, I had these cohorts of researchers. We dove into many different type of philosophical tenet. I'm a Eastern philosophical buff, not a Western philosophical buff. So my cohorts are Western philosophical scholars. So they brought a lot in terms of my learning process, and they learned my know-how of building businesses and dealing with large complex organization. And collectively, we were able to put together this framework. So I think the best learning comes from not just from you, but also exposing yourself to topics and subject and experiences that's not yours, right? In one of my books, I called Everything Connects, we talked about this notion of purposely omnivorous, and I was actually borrowing that from this. The food industry and chefs use this term all the time. If you want to develop a palate that's unique and different, then you have to taste a lot of different kind of palates and you can mix the French technique with Asian ingredients, but you have to kind of experience both if you want to create something new. So this purposely omnivorous, I kind of pride myself to be able to immerse myself into all sorts of learning, even though I may not agree with the philosophy or the process or their thinking. But I'm not close. I mean, I say, you've seen in the book, we talk about this being able to be radically open. That's where the open framework comes in. And it really talks to the fact that you have to force yourself to learn, even when you may not enjoy the topic or the process or whatever, but there is something you can gain out of it.
Yeah, no, I love it. One of the people, actually, the first person I ever had on the podcast was a guy called Ken Beck, who's very famous in the agile software development world. He ended up being one of the early sort of coaches for engineers at Facebook. But even better than that, he had this philosophy whenever somebody told him or suggested something to him that he totally disagreed with, that he thought was absolutely wrong, the first thing he would go and do is try it, just for the simple fact that his gut reaction was like, "This is radically wrong, so I'm going to try it just to because I totally disagree with it, just to almost shock, if you will, his system into getting out of his comfort zone and experiencing things that he didn't agree with, to see if was he the blocker or was his intuition correct, and I just love that idea. And it probably ties well with another chapter I really enjoyed, chapter 10, this idea of neuroplasticity and new beginnings, which really, again, it maybe goes to the beginning of our talk, this idea of when you're in your mid or later stages of your career, it's important to remember that your brain remains malleable. And, you talk about like little ways about incorporating ways to, if you will, like create a program to help yourself sort of stay moving or adapting or evolving. So talk a little bit about the program that you put together for yourself to challenge yourself, if you will, to keep moving forward, and then what you'd be recommending other people to try.
There's like a mindset element to it, and there's actual practice and tools and technology that you can use. So in my case, I can't do this every morning, but most mornings I start with the meditation and 25 35 minutes, and I kind of ground myself. Starts by this notion of gratitude, and then gets into the what is it that it's not my goals and objective, it's not my checklist, but what is it that I want to kind of push myself to do next, a barrier that I can cross. It's not a competition with anybody. It's just my own competition. It's like, I've written about this. Can I write something about this? I've written this way. Can I write this way? I developed this product. Can I design something that will do this? That sort of a thing, right? So it's a aspirational, but it's also like have a meditative way to kind of, structure my mindset in terms of learning and exploring and whatnot. Second is, I've been trying to use AI to create my own small language model with all the things that I have talked about, written, learned, and kind of say, okay, based on this, help me to craft something else. And do I agree with it or not? And I haven't been very successful because, it hallucinates. And maybe I'm not, gotten very good at defining the data structure and the logic. So it doesn't always come out right. But if I can get to the point where I can actually make it, it'll be my own little tool for myself based on my philosophy and on writing and whatnot to kind of see what can I do more above and beyond that. And obviously we have our own software team and enterprise team that's pushing the boundary or building our own platform. But these are kind of like, it's nothing to do with commercial success or nothing to do with the next big thing. It's more to do with what is it that I can do next. It's kind of that kind of a mindset.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to come at it too as well, right? Like as you say, like the best person to compete with is yourself. Like how do
Yes.
I just keep getting better? Or I had Gib Biddle was on the show. He's a former head of product for Netflix, and he sort of is one of these people who has this insatiable idea for creative pursuits. Like he would do things like any topic that he's interested in, he would try and learn it so he could teach it to his team or somebody in 2 weeks' time. And
Yeah.
he just found it as a great sort of habit, if you will, and forcing function that he would then sort of I can even imagine him right now, like he is definitely playing around with AI tools to understand how they work and what's unique about them, what's different about it, because it's a creative, intellectually creative pursuit for him
Yeah.
to discover these things, much like you're describing and are doing yourself too as well, right? And I think it's such an important part for people to make time in whatever capacity they have to be doing those types of activities, some sort of exploration or self improvement. But you even work in the reflection, if you will, through your meditation and like that is a very powerful system that you're starting to create for yourself that people can think about replicating for themselves. It's like what how can they think about areas of interest, curiosity, skills development, and then make time to go do it. Because personally for me, I actually notice when I get busy or allow myself to prioritize other things and don't do that, I'm a lesser person for it. I actually get
Yeah. Yeah.
frustrated, and
Yeah, I understand. You feel antsy. What I try to do, I try to have at least 2, 3 hours a day, if it's possible, which is not always possible. That just for myself. It's nothing to do. I don't want to have meetings. I don't want to talk to people. It's not isolation. It's almost like thinking time, right? I want thinking time and organizing time so that I can kind of prioritize and reprioritize and connect with myself so that I can say, okay, well, I've done this. What can I do next, or how can I help somebody, or these are the issues that I'm dealing with one of my customers. How can I help them? I need that time, and when you're always rushing, we started this conversation about move fast and break fast kind of a mentality, which is very it's very, very popular in tech industry, especially, as we both know. I constantly say that, you have to slow down, and you have to think before you act. And when you do that, it actually gets better. Einstein said this, Buddha said this, philosophers said this. Even Steve Jobs took time to build. Not everybody knows the story about, the iPhone and whatnot. But if you study how much time he took for Pixar and coming up with Toy Story, it's fascinating. It was not a how soon I can push it out to the market, is how much of a better product can I create to get it out there, right? So that requires thinking time, and when you don't apply thinking time, I think the output doesn't really becomes as impactful or as meaningful as you think it may.
Right on. Well, there's a couple of other things I'd love just to get your thoughts on, right? Like obviously there's the inspiration that you're constantly finding to, create these 10 books. What are those moments? Are they lightning insights? Is it when you're meditating? Is it when you're going for a walk? Is it that you bump into a problem and your curiosity drives it? Tell us what sort of are those, if you will, prompts that make you want to go on the sort of next endeavor.
I think it's a lot of different things. It's observation of what's going around the world as well, right? So, inspiration comes from within, but it's also observing what's going on, right? Like I wrote a piece, I try to write something every week. I wrote a piece last week about this whole kind of this uncertainty that we're all feeling. You kind of said that we're disconnected. And, I mean, if you look at all you have to look at, the market uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, and these major technological shift. Those are the three major things that's going on. And I wrote a book a while back called Survive to Thrive. It's 100% about resiliency. I tied back to that, and I just, I wrote that article, I think 2 days ago. Around this topic of uncertainty and what's the driver. So I find these bursts of thoughts or ideas that are kind of bugging me from because it's around me, or it's something that I experienced myself. So there's major impact, major events that turns into a major inspiration. But I look at also small inspiration, and I utilize it to write or I may see a tool, and I say, oh, that would be a cool thing to add in my software platform, right? So it's a lot of observation. It's like I mean. In Everything Connects, I talk about Da Vinci's way of thinking. He would go walk around the nature and look at shells, and that will create the inspiration for one of his invention. So it's not, I mean, by no means I'm anywhere near, have that kind of talent, but I try to kind of observe and learn and try to incorporate that in my and I'm very fortunate that I can I don't have to be tied to the next paycheck. So it's a unique luxury, and I realize that I'm grateful for that. But it allows me to kind of explore these things that most people may or may not be able to explore.
Yeah, no, it's great, and it's great. I'm a big believer in if you have these sort of gifts or of time, ultimately, it's important to use them well, and you're doing that absolutely. So tell us yourself, what are you most excited about now? Like as you look forward, what are some of the things that are starting to spark your curiosity? Or maybe you think that society needs to start thinking about unlearning.
I think we need to stop this mad dash of nonstop make everything efficient. I think we need to think more about effectiveness than efficiency, right? Because when you think about efficiency, I think you start to kind of outsource your human agency. That may be controversial statement in the context of somebody who is in the technology space and pushing the button for automation and better decision making and all that. But I think there is a greater purpose to be effective to each other and impactful to each other than just being efficient. So I'm trying to do things that kind of pushes the button of human agency and leveraging the human agency to make each one of us better than what we are, utilizing technology. Not just can I do this faster and can I do it, can I outsource this and outsource that? Pretty soon I don't even have to get my own food because my robot is going to bring
He's
my
gonna
food.
order you, put you on your
Yeah,
diet. You've had enough
exactly.
protein today. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, look, listen, Faisal, this has been fantastic to chat to you. The book is fantastic. Transcend, the New Science of Self-Actualization. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I'd really encourage everybody out there listening, grab yourself a coffee. It's fascinating and certainly gave me plenty of inspiration and thoughts of things that I could be doing different. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing your story with us. And Yeah, look forward to reading the next 10 books that you're going to publish, hopefully over the next few years as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Very really enjoyed it. I mean, I hope to stay connected and explore more.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review as it helps others find our podcast. For more episodes and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.